The United States entered its 12th year in the Viet War under President Nixon in 1972. Unknowingly or uncaringly, the tragedy of its own was about to take place here at home in the city of Los Angeles and throughout the county. The year started out promising. The Dallas Cowboys, America's team, won the Super Bowl. President Nixon was sworn in after winning his second term in a landslide. Sanford and Son became an instant hit. The troops were beginning to dwindle in Vietnam, and Bob Douglas became the first black man inducted into basketball's Hall of Fame.
Kev Mac video, you know this is for sure. Kev Mac video, open your soul, represent your ghetto, baby.
The tragedies that occurred in South Los Angeles in 1972 stunned the world. The Crips and the anti-Crip gangs, that later became known as Bloods, bloody war is said to be a direct result of the Crips' aggression and non-apologetically separating teenagers from their leather coats. This violation can be attributed to the Avenues, the gang that preceded the Crips: poverty, jealousy, bullying, or simply put, strong-arm robbery. How violent could these teenagers be up until this point? What did they call themselves? Crips or Cribs? The fact is, a lot of people in media and law enforcement hadn't even heard of the Crips yet. It wasn't until an incident involving members of the West Side Crips that the gang became widely known. It is also a fact that black exploitation movies had a strong influence on black gangs of Los Angeles. Movies such as Sweetback, Shaft, Superfly, The Godfather, Black Caesar, The Mac, and Peter Wheatstraw, just to name a few. We even got a homie that goes by the moniker Charleston Blue. One spokesman for the NAACP stated, "We are sick and tired of these bad films being made, destroying the black image and producing the wrong kind of symbol for black youth." His criticism was based on 3 of the movies I've named: box office hits such as Shaft, Superfly, and Comeback Charleston Blue. There was a lot going on in the Southland in 1972. Some good, others not so good. Okay, you mentioned the Johnsons.
Yeah.
I was told, it was my understanding, Michael Johnson was one of the founders of the Harlem Crips.
Yeah.
Would you say that's accurate?
I'll say that's 50% accurate.
50%.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the reason why I say it's 50% accurate, because at the formation of Harlem, it wasn't the Harlem Crips. The official title was Harlem Godfather with Class. There was no Crip associated with it. That the Crips were a different group of individuals, and the individuals who formed the community I come from didn't see themselves as typical gang members. They saw themselves as, grown men, even though they were just 19, 20, 21 years old. They saw the evolution of and thought the future held the foundation for an organization that would be empowering to the community.
We went from Harlem Godfather to Pico Harlem Godfather in the 20s. So we had all that area. We had all the area. We controlled the Washington skating ring, the Hollywood skating ring. Then we advanced to take over Dorsey High, Crenshaw High, with the 60s, with the original West Side 60s, and everybody who was active at the time under the West Side original Crip card.
The Crips got their name when they beat that boy down to death at the Hollywood Palladium about his leather coat.
On March 21st, 1972, shortly after a concert featuring Wilson Pickett and Curtis Mayfield, 20 youths belonging to the Crips robbed and beat Robert Ballou Jr. outside the Hollywood Palladium.
Burgundy leather coat, waistline. They tried to get at him, was trying to fight him, and he knew martial arts. He was kicking a hole in their asses.
Ballou was beaten to death after refusing to give up his leather jacket.
Here we have Conrad Williams. He got really known for what happened at the Hollywood Palladium, the aggression of the Crips and what they did and how they was carrying on, taking people's leather coats, and they beat the guy to death over his jacket.
He tried to run, they caught him, and it was a fence like this. When he tried to climb that fence just straight laid down, and they killed him. Stomped him out right there on that field. And said, nah, we don't believe in that black on black crime like that. Not killing your own people.
Speaking for myself, man, I really wasn't about that. When you're hearing about them jumping on niggas like Urkel, beating him to death over a leather coat, you know, me personally wasn't feeling that. And a lot of brothers felt the same way, you know what I mean? There wasn't a lot of us, but, you know.
The incident was published in newspapers nationwide, and people began to take notice.
The newspaper misspelled and put Crips instead.
This narrative has been repeated for decades. However, Robert Ballou was killed March 20 of 1972. The word Crips had already been printed in newspapers 6 weeks prior to the death of Robert Ballou Jr.
Tookie first made his reign, it was about taking leather coats, waistlines, I remember just as well. Then that's where it all started. That's when basically that's when the Crips emerged, and they start basically setting off in sections. Because you had one side, which was the west side, took it in. Their whole mission was leather coats. They weren't trying to convert or nothing, just taking the coats.
Of course, back then, all we did was fight, you know, and that was called cripping.
In the beginning stages of cripping, you had all the homies that was cripping. They was dudes who was tough in the neighborhood.
So they start Crips start sectioning off at that time. Everybody started basically their own hoods.
Now you just got anybody coming on. But back in the days, yeah, you know, Big James, guys like that, you know, already had reputations. So it was like, hey, the thing to be. You know, hey, what else would you be? You wouldn't be no sucker. You gonna be a Crip.
According to King Baba Louie, also known as A.C. Moses, him and Lorenzo Benton was approached by Lavelle Icky Dawson. Lavelle was AWOL from camp, as usual. Icky would often run away from juvenile facilities and somehow make his way to Piru Street. And now you have the Looters Park Piru. April 19th, the wrath of the Crips is spread to Gardena. A 15-year-old member of the Swamp Boys by the name of Danielle Tatum was killed in a gang war by the Crips. On May 20th, the city of Inglewood had its own experience with the emergence of street gang violence.
I was involved in the first West Side Crip murder with the rival chain gang, which are families now, in 1972.
Douglas Green, a teenage member of the chain gang, was killed by a bullet wound to his chest. Once again, members of the West Side Crips were responsible for the murder.
About the chain gang and Inglewood family, they weren't coming through here fucking with y'all?
No, we stopped going through there. They wasn't fucking with us. We stopped fucking with them.
Who's they main leaders?
Tank was their leader. Tank and Dirty Red, Wesley Logan. Them up right there. That was their main. We used to go to their shows. The Academy and Fifth Ave, straight up Manchester. And they was always, you know, jumping on homies and chasing us up out of there. And they always had them chains. We had the canes. We had the canes. And they had them chains.
2 weeks later, in Northern California, Angela Davis was sipping champagne in a victory toast with the jurors who acquitted her that Sunday. The prosecutor believed Angela Davis was in love with George Jackson and helped plan his escape. George Jackson, perhaps the single most feared man in the United States prison system, spent 10 years in prison and 7 of them in solitary confinement for stealing $7.20 in a gas station robbery. The prosecution continued to claim close, passionate involvement during the trial of Miss Angela Davis. She was acquitted June 4th, 1972.
Hoover. I joined Hoover. I left the east side and joined Hoover the first week Hoover came out. The first week they came out, and I was going to Bethune Junior High. You know, Hoover came out in 1972. Everybody, you got Hoover's don't know what year Hoover came out, but it came out in 1972.
Nearly 3 years after the inception of the Crips, the first Crip murder on another gang member had occurred, and then it happened again, and again, and again. This time it was on June 5th, 2 weeks after the Green murder, 2 months after the Tatum murder, 3 months after Ballou's murder. Frederick Little Country Garrett of the Brims was murdered by yet another member of the Crips. How was Country killed?
Country went to the party that night, and over on 71st or either 72nd and Vermont, and he got in a shootout with the Crips over there, and he got shot in the head.
Depending who you speak to today, a lot of Bloods emphatically remember Little Country as a killer also, which insinuates Raymond's gang wasn't the only killers.
Country was a killer.
In response to these several incidents, the anti-Crip gangs countywide teamed up to oppose the much bigger gang with the more vicious reputation.
Somebody had to stand up, and the Rue did.
This campaign has been going on almost 50 years. That's almost as long as the 54-year-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the summer of 1972, Slits Brewing Company and Stax Records held the first ever benefit concert at the LA Coliseum.
The Watch Stax concert was basically a fluctuating, it was one was at the sports arena, one was at Rear Rogers Park, and basically those are the two general areas that they were really introduced at, because in those areas you had more multitudes of gatherings of black in those particular areas. So they needed those areas and nowhere else.
The concert was said to be smoking hot, but the streets of LA was even hotter. A 14-year-old juvenile was booked on suspicion of homicide. He was accused of shooting and killing a 71-year-old. Glenn Brown was killed in his driveway by a shotgun blast to his stomach. Witnesses told police that they saw the youth get out of a car and run down the driveway shortly before a gunshot was heard. The accused killer admitted to being a member of the Baby Crips.
Raymond was the truest leader. I mean, he was the man. And he'd tell him in a heartbeat, I send my Baby Crips after you. He ain't sending the Crips, he's sending the Baby Crips. And we was his brainchild. We was his warriors. He's sending 14, 15-year-olds after you. Yeah, you done. And everybody knew that.
Around this time, Compton had its own conflict brewing. Mac Thomas' original Compton Crips became involved in conflict with the original Compton Piru Street Gang. A.C. Moses, better known as King Baba Louie, 18 of Compton, was savagely beaten with clubs and chains. He was taken to Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital, where his condition was listed only as fair. After this bloody confrontation, the friendship abruptly ended. This opened doors for the smaller gang to link up with other independent gangs in and around the city of Compton. The next community to feel the wrath of the Crips would be Watts in South Los Angeles. The date was June the 10th, 1972, when Lionel Campbell, better known as Skip, was killed.
He was standing on the corner of 87th and Bandera, and I told him, I said, hey, don't forget we're going to church with Mama tomorrow. He said, I'll be there. But me and my girlfriend friend crossed Firestone over to Holmes Street, and we heard a pow. It was in June. She thought it was a firecracker, but I was a gun person, so I knew the difference between firecrackers and gunshots. So I ran back, and I could see Skip running by the vacant lot, running wide-legged, and I ran to him. He collapsed right in front of me. I got there, and I held him, and I sit up there and watch my best friend dying. Yeah, he was killed in cold blood. They had pulled on the side of Skip, and they asked him where was the party at. He pointed out direction, They couldn't find it. Came back, called him a liar, jumped out the car on him. He started fighting two guys and was winning. And one of them cowardly pulled out a .22 and shot him in the throat.
Was those Crips or was that non-affiliate situation?
They were Crips.
After a crap game in Watts, Willie Brown, of 938 and a half East 92nd Street, was killed by a single blast in the stomach after allegedly ignoring a youth who claimed to be a member of the Crips gang. Willie was seen leaving the crap game at 1105 East 112th Street. Thursday, June 22nd, 1972, the Watergate scandal was about to begin. 4 to 5 burglars were arrested in what would later become known as the Watergate scandal. This laid the foundation for the name Watergate Crips, in which would form a year later. Hey, where did the name Watergate come from?
The Watergate scandal. That was like, oh, you niggas are scandalous. The next goes in 1972. See, Watergate started in 72 with what's that about Richard Nixon, the Watergate scandal.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we named the Watergate. They was like, oh, you niggas are scandalous. Y'all, cause the scandal was out. They called the niggas scandal. There ain't no water in the Watergate. Ain't no water until you gotta go all the way to play around there to the beach.
A rash of shootings and several murders would take place in playgrounds in the Green Meadows area. Green Meadows is a 2.2 square mile neighborhood in Los Angeles, California, with a population of more than 30,000 people. Green Meadows falls within South Los Angeles community and is home to Locke High School. Green Meadows community touches Florence on the north, Florence Firestone on the northeast, Watts on the east, Willowbrook on the south, Broadway Manchester on the west, Vermont Knolls to northeast, and Athens to the southwest. The Compton Creek runs through Green Meadows, east-west near 108th and north-south near Central Avenue. Green Meadows Playground and 109th Street Playground will become dangerous for black youth. September 10th, Bunchy Carter's little brother Kenny Carter and his friend Eddie Haythorne were arrested for the murder-robbery of Reverend A. Smith. The case was closely covered and detailed by local newspapers. Both Kenny and Eddie are still locked up 49 years later. That October, the Bay Area was getting ready for another celebration. The Oakland A's would become baseball's world champions as they beat the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series. The great Pete Rose came up with 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth, down 3-2. He hit a fly ball to the outfield.
Oakland has won the 1972 World Series.
Oakland won 3 out of 4 games in Cincinnati over the Big Red Machine. Not a lot of sports partying going on in Los Angeles at the time. Just ask Ram fans. The Rams went 6-7 with 1 tie that year and failed to make the playoffs. As the anger and hostility continued to grow in LA, Lil Chocolate was killed. Tookie referred to him as a Hoover Groover in his book Blue Rage Black Redemption. According to Tookie's book, the Hoover Groovers blamed the West Side Crips for Chocolate's murder, particularly Curtis Monroe, better known as Buddha. On October 5th, Craig Craddock was killed.
Well, me and my homeboy Short Dog, we was walking up 77, and when we got to Central, we seen Raymond and a couple of other little dudes, about 4 or 5 other dudes, on the corner of 78 by the liquor store. So when we walked up to them, we asked them what happened, because you could see on their face that something had happened. And they said, man, Craig had just got killed last night going in the store. You know, and that right there kind of messed Raymond up.
Craig was killed on 87th and Central at Kitchen's liquor store by a victim of his bullying tactics.
And not long after the funeral, Raymond went to jail.
Only 4 days later, on October 9th, 16-year-old Noel Willingham, also known as Chocolate, was killed at Locke High School.
The first blood, so-called blood, Ronnie Walker, he killed Chocolate. Okay? When Chocolate got killed, he was so little, he couldn't walk on the main line. He had no homies there. He was acting part.
His killers were also juveniles, in which 2 of them were also students of Locke High School. According to the principal, the 4 gangs at Locke High at the time were the Crips, the Denver Lanes, the Walnuts, and the Athens Parks. For historical purposes, it's noteworthy to notice the Crips are labeled as Crips, and the other gangs are labeled individually. According to Tookie, Raymond Washington's Eastside Crips broke into numerous splinter groups after his incarceration, as did Mac Thomas's Compton Crips when he was locked up. Factions began cropping up all over, and the West Side Crips became a cluster of independent gangs under one umbrella. In November, a war broke out in Compton between the Grandy Crips and the West Side Pyru.
Larry 10 Watts, born in the SIP, back in the day before the Bloods and the Crips. Family moved to Compton and then it all flipped. Co-founded the West Side Pyru, they on deck. War started with the Compton Crips in 72. Him and LB was shot on Central Avenue. But this is Pyru Street, niggas stand tall. Tam was shot in the leg, but he was still cool. And now we going blow for blow with the Grandies. Tam was a fighter with his hands, he's a champ, B. Representing for the Pyru, Tam was a G. Chillin' with Puddin', they shoot, you be dead up on the street. Tam Watts, Pyru Street, representing Red Rash, he's a Pyru G. Throw the P's up for this Pyru heat. CPT is in the building, this is Pyru Street.
Here's a 1972 map of gang territory as described by LAPD's 77th Division. The Eastside Crips, Westside Crips, Inglewood Crips, and Compton Crips were all up and running at the same time. Once again, you'll notice the anti-Crip gangs labeled individually, without the word blood attached to their name. Looters Park, the Bishops, Bounty Hunters, Athens Park, Denver Lanes, and the Brims will later become known as Bloods. November 18th, Lee Thomas, allegedly of Athens Park, was booked by Compton police for the murder of 16-year-old Raymond A. James, better known as Chocolate. Raymond was known as an Eastside Crip. Him and a friend were on bicycles at a taco stand at the corner of Rosecrans Avenue and Long Beach Boulevard when 2 youths tried to rob them. James and David sped off, but were overtaken by other youths, who shot Chocolate 5 times in the head and stomach. James died at Dominguez Community Hospital.
Watch this. I'm a second person, got a case. Okay, say so. I go in there, I ain't got no homies in there.
Sunday, December the 10th, a war erupted between Compton and Long Beach when Compton gang members attended a party in Long Beach. Willie Gaither was arrested for murder.
Not saying that Willie Gaither had anything to do with that, but it was a party out there, and the homie AB from front of the brother lost his life out there. So that right there, we had something against Long Beach, you know.
Yeah.
And over the years, it kind of just died out, and we fizzled out. Yeah, it fizzled out, and we bridged those gaps.
Big nylon, all them. Get it down. Come on, man. Oh, no, man. It's going down. And it went down.
By the end of November, there were 32 gang-related murders, and the people of Los Angeles were scared. Gang murders had tripled from the year before, and the overall murder rate reached 500, the highest in the history of Los Angeles. By now, every adult in America has heard the saying, history repeats itself. In 1972, Haitians fled Haiti to America by boat. Homicide numbers weren't just up in LA, they were up all across America in major U.S. cities, including New York, Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Back at home, The second weekend of December, 4 teenagers were wounded in 3 separate incidents. 2 of the wounded were juvenile members of the Crip gang and were apparently attacked by the rivals AC Deucey gang. The AC Deuceys were now known to police as Blackstones, and the Harlems had Crips attached to their name. It was indeed a new war on the West Side, the Harlem Crips versus the Blackstones. Up until this point, youth gang warfare had only been concentrated in South Los Angeles. Investigators said today there has been a dramatic increase in gang activity in the west central section of the city, an area that includes Mount Vernon and Fauché Junior High School and Dorsey High School. At the end of November, a special task force formed to help curb the spread of gang violence. 20 juvenile detectives were hired to devote 100% of their time to processing arrestees charged in gang violence. December 7th, the son of a Martin Luther King Jr. hospital official was murdered. Ronald Williams, a freshman at Southwest College and the son of Charles Williams, was fatally wounded when he tried to break up an argument. He died in Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital. Rodolfo Cadena would also be killed December 17th, 1972. 2 underground Mexican-American groups struggling for prison supremacy were blamed for Monday's murder. The deadly rivals were identified by a State Department of Corrections source as the New Family and the Mexican Mafia. Also involved was the Aryan Brotherhood, composed mostly of outlaw motorcyclists. The first of 2 incidents in 3 days erupted at Chino, with a knife attack on 2 brothers identified as the New Family members. The 2 brothers were stabbed as they prepared to enter the recreation yard. In the second assault involving Rudolph Cadeno, a member of the Mexican Mafia, authorities said he was stabbed at least 50 times. Rudolph and 2 others were stabbed when officers opened the Palm Hall, a maximum security facility to allow 34 prisoners into the recreation yard. December 20th, one suspect was arrested by the name of Curtis James Moreau, better known as Buddha, 18 of 1619 West 105th Street. He was arrested for murder but released because of insufficient evidence. By Christmas Eve, 1972, there was at least a half-dozen Crip gangs and 8 rival gangs. The 43rd Street Crips, Avalon Garden Crips, and the Harlem Crips were official. Out of all the non-Crip gangs and the anti-Crip gangs, none that had blood as their first or last name.
And all I got to say, all you brothers who might be looking at this, you young brothers, take heed. Education is powerful. It's what you need. Opportunity is out there today. Accept the opportunity from these people. They're not your enemies. The biggest battle that man fights is within himself, and not nobody else. You see, it's not the years in life that count. It's the life and years that matters, young brothers. And with that said, assalamu alaikum.
A fun fact, the Pookie twins from Rolling 90s was born in 1972.
This is Los